myself enough. I'm not really sure how you expect me to get this to work.
Being a guerrilla fighting a war and a business community. And what are the similarities? Well, if you don't go away with anything else, there are two things that you got to do. And you all know this. As I look around the room here, most of the hair is sort of the same color as mine. So I know that you all have been doing that. And that's number one, setting a goal for yourself, your family, your business. The other one is planning. And while we're speaking about planning, if you haven't thought about where you're going to move when you leave here, you might want to think about that. And Billy Rowe, where's Billy? He left. Oh, that's unlucky. Remind me, and I'll point Billy out to you, because he has some really nice real estate, and a lot of nice condominiums out in the countryside, real quiet, and you'll really enjoy your stay there forever. So the things that we want to look at are the goals and the planning and the similarities there. Now, I was a planner, and I don't very often admit this to people, but for 4 years in the Air Force, that was my job, doing plans. Terrible job. And a thankless one until it's time to implement something. And I can give you an example. When I was at Shaw, first thing I did, they put me in the plan shop. And that was really awful because I couldn't fly. And the wing commander said, we don't have a contingency plan. If we had to pick up a squadron and go somewhere tomorrow, we don't have that in our, just to go anywhere. We know how to go to Europe, we know how to go to the Far East, but we don't know how to just go anywhere. And I thought, well, that's a crazy thing to ask. Build a plan to anywhere. So I got with my captains and we wrote a plan to go.
Sorry, my Thomas Sumter just went out.
Okay, have a good trip. So we built a plan to go anywhere. And that plan to anywhere was approved, and about 2 weeks later, there was a thing called Grenada. And guess what plan they grabbed? The plan to anywhere. So, in your business, I challenge those that are in business and those that aren't. We need to have, in these troubled times and scary times, we need to have plans, and we need to have contingency plans, backup plans. And the same thing applies to the businesses as applies to the military. You need to think about where your assets are. Marion understood the logistic team. He probably understood it better than Green, and most of the historians in here will say Green was our greatest logistician during the American Revolution. I'll tell you that I don't think he was as good a logistician as Marion. Marion didn't have squat, and he kept his troops out there, kept about 1,500 or more British tied up all the time. And what did Marion usually ride with, Joe? 60 or 80?
Less than that.
That's right. And so as those troops moved around, Marion had to think about how he's going to feed them and so on and so forth. We need to do the same thing every day. And Chris mentioned the hit and run idea. And that's the hit and run of the guerrilla. And the guerrillas did that. They still do that. The guys that we're fighting in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, and a few other places around the world. Took lessons from Marion. They tell me that he's the only American general that is taught in all the military colleges around the world. That's a pretty awesome thought. But he understood the hit and run. Now, we need to think along the business model the same way. Lamar Kennedy down here probably can't go toe-to-toe with Walmart and everything in his store, day in and day out. But Lamar Kennedy gets the ad from Walmart. Walmart, how many weeks ahead do you think Walmart has to plan their advertising campaign? Anybody? Give me a guess. 2 months, 3 months? Lamar Kennedy can probably respond in a day. Call up the Manning Times on Monday and say, I need an ad in the paper this week. And Kathy flies into action and gets it for him. You can't do that, Kathy?
Not my part.
Anyway, let me know if something interesting comes up on the screen there, will you? The idea is that Lamar can get the ad from Walmart and look at it. And he looks down through there and he says, they're running a special over in the farmer's market on grapes this week. Walmart's got them for $2 a pound, and I can get them and sell them to break even at $1 a pound. People come in and look at the stuff and pick up a few other things. He flies into action and hits that one point and does it. And he gets us in there to buy grapes, and we buy a bunch of other stuff. But that's the whole idea of the guerrilla marketing, as I understand it. Now, AC English can probably correct me if I went off on the wrong track there. Because AC was a guerrilla banker. I walked in there, guy said, go see AC when you need a house phone. And I walked in there and he said, well, go over here and sign the paper with this lady, and we'll call you this afternoon. And he called and said, sure, yeah, you got it. But I could do that at the Bank of Clarendon. But do you think I could have gone to one of the big banks, to Wachovia, for instance, and pulled that off? I don't think so. So we have to look at those ideas. There are different phases of guerrilla warfare, and this is what I really like to talk about. The first phase is a hit and run. And the historian will have to help me with the dates since my memory isn't up here and behind me. But during his first phase, by his first 21 battles, and Karen pointed out, she questioned me because I said, well, he won 20 of the 21 battles. And she said, I thought he won all his battles. Well, we looked it up, and the interesting thing about it is, when Marion was in command, he won all his battles. It was the battles that we charged him with losing were the ones that his subordinates were off, like Hardin down in the south, and I forget who that was. It was up at Lynch's Creek. Somebody was up there and got beat. But the ones where he was there, so an awesome leader. Anyway, his first, basically, year was all the hit and run kind of stuff. And in guerrilla warfare, there are 3 phases. The first phase is a hit and run, where you just can't stand. All you can do is run in there and take a few shots and beat feet. The next phase is where you can sustain moderate combat with them. You can run in there and stay with a few days, but then you got to fall back, get resupplied and so forth, then you come fight for a few more days. He went into that phase, and when he did, we saw that at the Bridges campaign. And the Bridges campaign started right down the street from us here, down on Wyvern Swamp. And he fought there. And again, Karen and Carol and I, the last couple of days, were laughing about it, because can't you just see Marion riding out? And here come the British trotting out, and they're going to catch Marion. They're on this trail. And here comes this guy riding out, tips his hat to him, steps aside with the horse, and there comes Marion's cavalry right into the British. And they say, "Welcome to our land." And for the next 2.5 weeks, Marion attrits over 250 to the British side as they fight battle after 8 battles, as they fight battle after battle after battle after battle, fighting their way back to Georgetown. And finally, at the Symp River, we're in business. Now you'll find out what I'm supposed to be telling you. Okay. We'll go fastly over what I already told you. But I think this is what Chris was talking about. And this is by Bill Malton. Drew it. I forget, are we advancing or retreating? And can you imagine being in Marion's group, and you attack, and you fall back, and you attack, and you fall back. You go home, plant your corn, come back in, attack, fall back, go back home, harvest your corn, etc. Okay, we already talked about this. Knowing when and where to act, that's probably the tricky part about having a goal and having a plan, if there is a tricky part. But if you have set your goals properly, and I'll be honest with you, after I retired from the military, I did real estate for 6-7 years, something like that. And that was the toughest thing for me, to set a goal, because I knew that nobody else was going to be there to take the blame. If I said I was going to make 12 contacts this week, and I only made 8, there was nobody I could blame but George Summers. And so what you have to be careful of when you do that is that you keep your goal in front of you, and you keep your plan in front of you. This is sort of an interesting thing, and this goes about, can a military guy learn anything from the business world, or can the business world learn anything from the military guys? General Creech was the commander of Tactical Air Command. That's all the fighters in the U.S. Air Force based in the United States in the late 70s, early 80s. And he was fascinated with the way General Motors did business then. And he would go out there and he would take his wing commanders and his generals with him, and they would sit down with the personnel, upper level of personnel at General Motors, and find out how they were thinking and what they were doing. It was sort of interesting when I entered the fight in this arena in the mid-'80s. The General Motors guys were coming to us to see what we were doing, and the innovative stuff that our young airmen were coming up with, and they were carrying it back the other way. What we need to carry away from there is the fight, whether you're a guerrilla fighting in the jungles of Vietnam, or you're fighting in the swamps of South Carolina, or you're in the business community, it's an ongoing thing. And I think, again, AC, now, if you're like Gladys Grothrow, it's like, you know, I need to sell a car today, and then I go to the golf course. Is that right, Lance?
Used to.
Everybody that's in business, that's been in business, or will be in business, knows you're going to succeed. It's every day you got to do it. And that's sort of, I put up here, that's, the fighter pilot is sort of like being a guerrilla. I mean, you're out there by yourself, and if you think it's fun being a fighter pilot, it is. We do stuff that you never even think of. But there's some scary moments once in a while. I was over Vietnam one night. They launched over 24 missiles at me. And we talked about every day we go into business, you gotta be on your game. You can't have a bad day like Clemson did last night. So every day you gotta be peak. If you talk to John McCain, he'll probably tell you the exact day and hour that his game wasn't quite what it should have been. But anyway, that's what I tell somebody when Carol's running the projector for me. I tell them right this morning, when she's on the projector, when it's time to move on to the next slide, I know it because the slide is gone. Anyway, the reason I'm here with you is because, fortunately, one night over Vietnam, the guys on the ground were also not on their game, just as I wasn't. But back to the guerrilla warfare and defining it, you got small unit operations. So the guerrilla tactics in business probably are better organized, as I pointed out with the Mark Kennedy example, for a small business than with a big one. And the attack and withdraw, rapid hits and quick decisions, harassing the enemy. This one here applies where? Next slide. Right here. Everywhere. And I think if there's anything that this community has above everybody else around the United States, around the world, is that one thing right there, is they build great customer relations. But Jay Levinson in his guerrilla marketing talks about that the guerrilla concept to hit in small areas, like we talked about, picking the grapes and selling them at a low price, picking one area in a business and attacking the big guys there works better with small businesses and entrepreneurs, but they got to have creative ideas. Can't be the same old thing. And it's got to move at a fast pace, unconventional promotions. And I don't know, Lannis has some of those sometimes, you know, sends out a card, and, you know, fill out this card and tell me how my service is, and the next week you get advertisement saying, you know, come buy a car from me. So you know that's what he's doing to you. Customer relations, like I said, they're great in this area. Comparing the two, you see there are similarities there between the what Marion's tactics were and what our business community can use. Okay, we were talking about these. We were in the small unit hit and run, and we had gone on to go through the business. So I was from August 1780 to January 81 was when Marion won 20 of his 21 engagements. The moon phases up there, for those of you that haven't been here before, fascinated me when I read about Marion's battles at night. And I just wondered, would he have attacked on a full moon or a dark night? And everybody knows the answer because I've heard me say it 6 times now. He attacks in the dark of night. And if you grow up in the swamp and you're comfortable in the swamp, why not attack in the dark of night? Because you know the guys out of London sure aren't comfortable in there in the dark of night. So that's a neat thing. Chris talked about the supply line, the logistics, and you had Camden was their main base in the interior. They could get supplies from Georgetown, Charlestown. Everything came right through here, as she said, through what is now known as Clarendon County. By riding no more than about 20 or 25 miles back and forth, he could block either of the main trails. And not only the supplies were they interested in getting, but the messages. How many times did Chris mention today? 6 or 8 times she said, so-and-so did not get the message because the Americans captured it. So, played a significant role of tying up the British down here. What you need to think about is Cornwallis, when he went trucking off to North Carolina, he left this thing, this gigantic area down here, to Marion the gorilla. And we used to say in the military, an 800-pound gorilla. Well, we had a little tiny misshapen guy that was, in fact, as far as the British were concerned, an 800-pound gorilla loose behind him. And Chris pointed out to you, the British said they lost the war in the South, so why aren't we smart enough to say we won the war in the South? Okay, then we went into the second phase where they make a continual contact, but they back off a little bit. So he fight for a day, keep sniping, keep the pressure on the British, and then he'd engage them at another bridge. And then we see them at Fort Watson. And they aren't quite to the standard siege warfare there. They don't have a cannon. They don't dig siege trenches. They're just sort of surrounding them there. Okay. Just back to the Bridges campaign, this is where it went, started at Wyvoo Swamp, came up here to King Street, came on back down to Georgetown. Then we see them at Fort Mott. And at Fort Mott, they come out more as a conventional force. They have a cannon this time. They go up. Marion says to them, would you like to surrender before I beat your butt? And they said, no, go ahead and start beating. And he did. And then at Utah Springs, we see them. Here he is, as Chris described it. Marion's in charge of this whole front line of militia. They've been issued about 20 rounds of ammunition apiece. And all they have to do is stand opposite the finest British troops that the Empire could muster and face them eyeball to eyeball, reload their guns, fire, reload, fire. Do that for 20 times. That's probably, even a fast guy with a musket, that's going to take him, what, about 10 minutes? Maybe 5? So 5 minutes, they're toe-to-toe with the British, shooting at them. And then they smartly march off and let the Continentals have it, the British. But the training, this, I think, shows Marion had trained his men. They were more than just a bunch of rowdies out running through the swamp. The guys that were able to line up and go toe-to-toe with the British had to have been trained, and you had to have practice. Okay, when you play in a guerrilla warfare game, you can't stall out. You can't be paralyzed about it. You've got to have the plan. You've got to know where you're going. You've got to have the goal, and you've got to be ready to start. Anything you're doing in life, if you stop, you're dead or you're out of business in the business world. Anybody want to comment on that? I suspect, again, the bankers in here can tell us the guys stop. And we can see it in the news every day. Okay. Clausewitz wrote in the early 1800s, I believe it was, the idea, his idea, now he, picked up some of the stuff from the Revolution and so forth, I'm sure, but writing in Europe, he perceived that the idea of that if they armed the civilians and over an extended time and area and given enough guess the general reason was all of the commanders sort of detested it. And they were all, for the most part, West Pointer guys on both sides, and they just didn't like the idea of guerrilla warfare. John Mosby, the Gray Ghost, Confederate, is probably the most efficient at it and did the best work as a guerrilla. Okay, for the business community, and I never broke this code while I was in real estate. I could never figure out how to take on the high volume salespeople. But they had to challenge the larger companies, and it has to be small periodic attacks. You can't go against them full time, they say. And try to establish a foothold in one particular market niche. And you see that. Look at some of the internet companies that we look at now. Google started out, Yahoo, all of these little guys with these little wild ideas, and now they're massive companies. And selectively cut the prices. This one is, we see all the time, we see in the news media where they get a high-priced exec to go somewhere and move over. And intense bursts of promotional activity. And we're going to talk a minute about the technical. And we see the problems with the technical here firsthand today. But can you imagine if a small businessman in Marion, South Carolina, emailed everybody even on the farmer's telephone, little internet that we got here, but hit everybody with a computer in Manning and said, I'm selling popsicles for a nickel today from 10 o'clock to noon. If you want one, come on by. What a massive advertising campaign that would be. Kathy would be screaming at her advertising people because she didn't get any money out of it. But just think of what that would do. And the response that you could get. I wanted to put this in there. I don't know that anybody in here would confuse a terrorist with a guerrilla, but I wanted to be sure you did not. A guerrilla fighter is a military kind of guy, and he's going to go after militarily significant targets. That doesn't mean a busload of civilians. And targeting general population targets. The saturation bombing we did in World War II, that was because we weren't any more accurate than that. The only way we could take out a rail yard was to obliterate miles and miles of ground. We're a little better than that today. Same thing with in the marketing world. It's got to be sound marketing and business. I guess somebody should have gone up a month or two ago and talked to Wall Street guys about that, shouldn't they? And showing good judgment. Wright was telling me this morning about his son, some of the deals he heard of in New York, the packaging of, and I'm sure AC can tell us that he's seen this too, the packaging of some of the mortgages, how bad they were. Karen was telling us a deal that a guy brought